Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Reich, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and to our monthly webinar series, Climate Conversations: Pathways to Action. The National Academies provide independent, objective advice to inform policy with evidence, spark progress and innovation, and confront challenging issues for the benefit of society. In keeping with this mission, we're excited to host these conversations about issues relevant to policy action on climate change. I'd like to acknowledge that the National Academy's Washington, D.C. headquarters is physically housed on the traditional land of the Nquanchitang and Piscataway peoples past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have been its stewards throughout the generations. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land, and acknowledge that the expertise held by different Native communities is crucial to the work of understanding and addressing climate change. Today, we'll talk about how to help K-12 schools reduce their carbon emissions. Our conversation will be recorded and available to view here right after the event. If you'd like to ask questions, please submit them in the box below the video at any time, and we'll incorporate them in a dedicated question and answer period in the final half hour. We also encourage you to participate in the polls that will appear in that same location and give your feedback after the event in the survey linked above the video. Above, you'll also see a link to sign up for our weekly newsletter about all the upcoming climate activities at the academies, including our September climate conversation on how to better incorporate climate into the economic models used in policymaking. I'm grateful to be joined today by Anissa Hemming, Director of the Center for Green Schools at the U.S. Green Building Council, where she provides strategic direction and coordinates an organization-wide team to promote environmental sustainability, health and wellness, and sustainability literacy in school systems around the world. Anissa will introduce our conversationalists and moderate the event. Thank you again for joining the National Academies for Climate Conversations. Anissa, it's all yours.
Thanks, Alex. Nice to be with you all today. I'm so excited that National Academies is bringing this topic to its audience. It's something I'm asked all the time at the U.S. Green Building Council. Why schools? Why does it matter to the climate conversation? It's not always obvious to folks that don't work with schools all the time, because schools are a distributed resource among all our communities. So it's hard to tell the scale and scope that schools encompass. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today and what the impact of school infrastructure is on climate change and on carbon emissions. Like all sectors in U.S. society, the K-12 education sector faces substantial challenges addressing carbon emissions. We're going to need to leverage the strengths of education professionals and community partners nationwide to address climate change within this sector. But despite all those challenges and limited resources, there are a lot of initiatives underway to reduce emissions and save on overall costs and energy use. And we will hear about a lot of those initiatives today and give you some ideas for what you can do with the schools in your area or schools you work with. This session is going to be focused on school infrastructure and what we can do in that arena to mitigate climate change. We will be mentioning some resources for schools. The National Academies is going to be discussing the broader role of education in terms of learning and sort of education's role, educating the student role in addressing climate change in a future conversation. So this conversation will focus on school infrastructure. I am so glad to be joined by two people who can speak to what it's like to implement changes on the ground in a school district, as well as how to support and accelerate efforts by schools nationwide. Shannon Oliver is the manager of energy and sustainability for Adams 12 5-star schools, a public school district serving 36,000 students in Denver, Colorado metro area. He oversees the district's sustainability benchmarking, facilities improvement projects, and greenhouse gas inventory and its sustainability management plan. He is also the board chair of the Colorado Association for School District Energy Managers, so he has a broader sense of what other districts around the state are doing as well. We'll be bringing that knowledge to bear today too. Great to have you, Shannon. And Andrea Suarez Falcon serves as Special Advisor for Infrastructure and Sustainability at the U.S. Department of Education, where she leads matters related to school environment, sustainability, and infrastructure, including overseeing the U.S. Department of Education's Green Ribbon Schools Recognition Award, the nation's only comprehensive federal school sustainability award. Great to have you too, Andrea. All right, so let's get kicked off. First, it's always nice to start with the context that brought people to the work that they're doing. So I'm wondering, Andrea, starting with you, can you tell us a bit about what brought you into this space?
Sure. It was in 2011, 2012 when the U.S. Department of Education, where I work, received a request from 80 national organizations and state organizations asking that we create that award, the award you mentioned, U.S. Department of Education Green Ribbon Schools. And that award is founded around three pillars: reducing environmental impact and costs, improving health and wellness, and teaching effective environmental and sustainability education. Schools, districts, post-secondary institutions, and early learning centers get nominated through their state education authorities to the federal education agency. Over 12 years now, we've honored over 700 schools and districts from 46 state entities. We've received more requests, developed new programs, worked to align with the priorities of the Biden administration in terms of climate and environmental justice, and are now providing a home for matters related to infrastructure and sustainability beyond just the award, so that we can partner and communicate effectively on these topics.
That's great. And what about you, Shannon? What brought you into this kind of work?
Yeah, so I've been in my role as the energy and sustainability manager for about 7.5 years, and my educational background is in environmental health and public health. So really the crux of the climate conversation for me is kind of the same crux as in public health and sustainability. We refer to it as the triple bottom line, which is where we kind of expect, the general populace, either as individuals or organizations, to change behaviors. And in order to do that, they need to understand, or at least be aware of, the environmental implications of their behaviors. And it certainly often requires that economic motivation. So I think schools have a really unique perspective and opportunity to kind of walk the walk in this space and show the communities where they are located how these actions can be implemented.
Yeah, it's really helpful to have someone like you in a school district that can guide. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. Zooming back out to the conversation that the perspective that I highlighted earlier, sort of people don't really understand the scale of schools, the impact. Andrea, how big are carbon emissions from schools? Just so the audience can get a sense of the biggest opportunities related to those emissions.
Sure. Let me share a few statistics that I think are helpful. Schools annually spend $8 billion on energy. They emit an estimated 72 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is equivalent to the output of 18 coal plants or more than 8 million homes. The country's 130,000 schools account for a large portion of public sector buildings. Buildings are roughly 40% of the US's greenhouse gas emissions. There are other aspects of schools' carbon footprint to consider as well. It's estimated that schools manage 2 million acres of land. The public school fleet is actually the largest mass transit system in the US. Close to 95% of the nation's 560,000 school buses run on diesel fuel, which emits high levels of carbon dioxide and pollutes the air. In the last school year, schools served an estimated 4.5 billion school lunches, and school districts waste 530,000 tons of food a year, accounting for nearly 2 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. There are, however, some exciting opportunities embedded in these seemingly monumental challenges. Mitigating climate emissions at schools, first of all, has the co-benefit of addressing the environmental health needs of children. And then a lot of these upgrades that improve both efficiency and health conditions for students and staff. In addition, I would be remiss if I did not mention that the nation's 130,000 schools play a unique role in helping shape attitudes about climate and the environment for the nation's 50 million K-12 students, and ones that they'll carry with them the rest of their lives. Addressing carbon emissions in facilities creates opportunities for students to prepare for college and career pathways, engage with real-world problems, and find solutions. This real-world learning that allows them to address climate challenges can also help alleviate climate anxiety. It's my understanding, as Anissa said, that this environmental and sustainability learning work will be the subject of another upcoming webinar, but I still want to at least acknowledge it on this one.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good context for the audience. These are huge challenges, but also a lot of opportunity to specifically address them at schools where kids are learning. It's just a really wonderful intersection of this type of work. So let's bring it down to the ground. Shannon, can you tell us a little bit about the progress that your school is making and how you've been able to reduce emissions? So what other benefits has that work brought? And then also, what's been motivating the school district to make it possible for you to drive these changes there?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, starting, with my energy manager hat, having an inventory is key. Having a greenhouse gas inventory is a really good place to start. You can't manage what you don't measure, what we like to say. And so we've had some good success. We began tracking our greenhouse gas emissions in 2017. And we've seen a little over a 7% decrease as of the 2021 calendar year. Interestingly, about half of this reduction is from our specific grid getting cleaner, which highlights the importance both of working with local and regional utilities, as well as considering that grid makeup, if you're planning for greenhouse gas targets, for a school district. Some of the successes we've had are some new buildings we've constructed is a new career and tech ed center that's operating at about a 35 energy use intensity, which is a common metric in energy management to kind of compare buildings side by side and see their relative efficiency. And 35 is pretty good for a career and tech ed center. You might see those typically operating more around like an 80 to 100, and the lower the number, the better. We've also got a brand new K through 8 operating at about a 28 EUI, which is really good. The target for our region to be kind of net zero emissions ready is 25, so we're pretty close there. We do have another new K through 8 major renovation that is net zero emissions for its electricity use due to some solar offset. Interestingly enough, too, fleets have a large impact, as we've mentioned, and we have not made moves towards electric quite yet, but I think for schools that are looking to get started in that space, simple things like route optimization can make a huge impact. We did a route optimization project coming out of COVID and reduced the miles driven by our fleet by 13% by simply reviewing those actions. So the motivation behind this is kind of twofold. We have some great policy happening here in the state of Colorado that is requiring building benchmarking and tying this to greenhouse gas inventories, as well as some very strong economic motivators for our school district due to fluctuating energy markets and the waste we see in both energy use and some of the consumption things like serving meals that Andrea mentioned.
Yeah, so the waste is the noticing the waste or accounting the waste has really been a motivating factor.
Identifying that waste and saying, well, why are we wasting? Essentially, those are dollars that could be put in the classroom, right? And so really important to consider that.
Yeah, good. Andrea, can you give other examples of how school systems are making changes to reduce emissions from around the work with the Green Ribbon Schools program gives you a really good window into that?
We see a lot of examples every year. Schools are partnering with their local energy utility agencies and private sector to not only install more energy efficient equipment, but even some renewable energy sources. We see folks taking steps to ensure safe routes to school that encourage active transportation through bike trains and walking school buses. I think that's a great example of a no-cost step. They're reducing transportation emissions by purchasing compressed natural gas, propane, and other cleaner energy options. Some are, as Shannon mentioned, even purchasing electric school buses. Schools are growing in awareness of their carbon footprint and the health impact of the meals they serve and looking to provide more local, school garden grown and nutritious meals. They're also, like you just said, looking at that waste impact that goes to landfills. And this is especially evident in these campaigns nationwide to divert yard and food waste through composting. Recycling and composting also offer tremendous learning opportunities.
Definitely. Yeah, they do. So, Shannon, just interested if you have a couple of examples from your work with the Colorado energy managers that you work with. Any other examples you bring forward of cool things that they're doing in their district?
Yeah, a couple interesting things on sort of two sides of the coin. One is many folks may have seen in national news. Denver Public School District has an amazing student group leading some efforts to affect climate change and sort of going to their school board and saying we want a climate action plan for our school district. Now, district, you go make that happen, and it's really put into motion a lot of good work for the largest school district in the state. And another very large school district, Aurora Public Schools, has been working with some national partners, U.S. Department of Energy, and through some various funding models to really try to coalesce a multi-building campus under 1 meter and be able to produce a very large amount of solar based on that sort of utility regulation. It gets a little in the minutia there, but it's a pretty neat approach and a novel approach to sort of desegregating energy use in a large campus and allowing them to leverage that into kind of greater solar energy production.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. So I want to go into sort of the policy and planning that are needed to move green schools and climate action in schools forward. We know that fuel and energy costs alone are a really significant portion of school system budgets. We heard that from Andrea just before. Investments in efficiency and renewables can save a lot of money for schools. But schools are also asked to do so much with such little money and always overloaded with requests. And there's also this deferred maintenance at schools. So, they're often climbing out from below zero when it comes to improving their infrastructure, buildings in particular. And in addition to all of that, we're coming out of this very challenging few years of the pandemic. So there's a lot of challenges to surmount. And I want to start by thinking about the funding that is going to schools as just sort of context setting for addressing these challenges. So, Andrea, I'm going to start by asking you a bit about the roles of different government entities in funding schools. So, on average, across the country, local school districts provide about 3/4 of funding for capital improvements. States provide, about a fifth or so. The federal government provides very little and mostly situations. And all of that varies widely from state to state. Some states give much more toward capital projects, and some states give zero or near zero to capital projects in school districts. So whose responsibility is it to help schools play a role in addressing climate change amidst all the other things that schools are asked to do?
This is a question I get a lot in a decentralized education system with local control like our own. We don't have a federal Ministry of Education in the U.S. The answer is that it's all of our responsibility to improve our school facilities and grounds. We can't just say it's just the federal government or local government or states. We have to work together. Of course, it's less about what I personally see as the appropriate role for any given federal agency than what Congress deems the appropriate role for a federal agency. Historically, at the federal level, you mentioned we have a really small amount, 1% of that school facilities and grounds funding. And that's because Congress has not authorized the federal education agency with significant school infrastructure resources or funds. So because of these limited authorities and funding at our U.S. Department of Education, we've had to use more targeted strategies that address the overarching needs of school facilities. This includes working with a lot of our partners, like other federal agencies, nonprofits, like the Center for Green Schools, working with state agencies, and really maximizing the impact of our communications and outreach. You can see that with our Green Ribbon Award. We're standing up examples, we're highlighting them, we're trying to bring attention to their work and inspire other schools. And that's within the scope of our authorities, and it doesn't require a lot of new funding. We did, importantly, just recently at the end of 2022, in the end of 2022 omnibus appropriations bill, did receive funding for 2 new infrastructure programs that relate to this work. They will be announcing their first grantees this fall. Those are the Supporting America's School Infrastructure Grant. That one is intended to bolster several of the lowest capacity state authorities in school facilities to in turn then support their highest need school districts. And the other grant is a National Center on School Infrastructure, which founds a clearinghouse and technical assistance center to support high needs districts across the nation. In both of these programs, healthy, safe, sustainable 21st century school facilities and grounds that support high quality learning are a central tenet. I should be clear that these are not programs that individual schools can apply for. Rather, they're designed to bolster capacity to address school facilities matters, including sustainability at the state and district levels. We are, however, working closely with our federal partners at the Department of Energy and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to promote their funding for schools, as well as the various tax credits that schools can also leverage. Many of these are open to school districts and have a more direct impact.
So given all of that context about funding then, so how can school districts afford to make changes? What resources are available to help them move this ball forward?
The good news is that there are federal funds available. They don't live at the U.S. Department of Education. They're at a lot of our partner agencies, but they are, what the good news is, they're designated really for the nation's neediest schools, whether they're urban or rural. For example, in the last several years, we've seen a real surge in the number of committed electric school buses. And the majority of this growth is due to U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Clean School Bus Rebate Program, which awarded over $900 million for more than 2,400 electric school buses to 389 school districts. So there are now electric school bus commitments in all 50 states. In terms of efficiency, my colleagues over at the U.S. Department of Energy have been authorized funds that districts and their partners are together eligible to apply for. There are also funds being dedicated to water and air quality at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, with grant announcements for those coming soon. And then over the last several years, the American Rescue Plan funds, which have been administered through the U.S. Department of Education, have been used across the nation to address needed school facilities repairs and improvements that reduce the risk of transmission of COVID-19 and support student health. Fortunately, many of these same HVAC improvements that protect occupant health through improved indoor air quality also increase building performance through greater efficiency.
Yeah, we have more resources now from the federal government than we have ever had in my 15 years of doing this work. It's very exciting. Through the Inflation Reduction Act, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a lot opportunity. And you mentioned tax incentives earlier. I just wanted to pipe in that this is a new day for public entities like public school systems to take advantage of tax incentives, which hasn't been possible before because they don't pay taxes. But now we have this option from Treasury of direct pay with the tax incentives that came out of Inflation Reduction Act. Very exciting time for climate action at schools because of these resources. So besides the federal resources that are available, Shannon, I'm wondering if we can get back into the technical aspects of reducing emissions. There are major opportunities in the sort of life cycle of infrastructure to address emissions and these opportunities that pop up as you go in managing infrastructure. So can you talk about sort of the intertwined opportunities between new buildings, new school buses, and making sure existing systems as effectively as possible? Like, where do those opportunities come up?
Yeah. And I think, for new construction, really, it kind of comes down to codes and design standards a lot, right? If we're sort of required to meet the latest, international energy codes, that's going to get us there in that new construction. Otherwise, schools and architects and general contractors kind of like to repeat, what they've done and how they've had success. So they may not, push the envelope on their own at times. And I think if there's an opportunity to also I'll implement that in like a renovation perspective as well, such as if you're modifying certain components of a building or some percentage of a building, that you then kind of have to get looped into the newest codes, at least for energy efficiency. That could be really, really beneficial. I know the Colorado State here has implemented a building performance standards rule that's kind of attempting to affect some of that. I think for the midlife renovations, those could be a little tougher to do, right? Things can be pretty costly to modify. But for a lot of the energy saving type projects, HVAC lighting, certainly renewable energy, these can be kind of targeted through different funding models. So many of the federal money that's available, as well as something like energy performance contracting, which, if you're not familiar, is a financial mechanism through which building renovations can happen that reduce your utility costs through those renovations, and you sort of pay for that project with the money saved over time. It's a really great model. We conducted a project here for my school district, a $2 million project, and we're able to get a lot of lighting done and the rooftop solar that got us our first kind of net zero school. So again, energy performance contracting, really good financial mechanism there. And then as far as end of life replacements, really those should loop back to new building design, but take some extra time, take some extra step to review what could be reused. In the net zero electric school I mentioned, that was a major renovation. We were able to keep an existing portion of the building and reuse a lot of the components of the building, such as the gym floors, to use as siding and down hallways or different components. And there's a huge opportunity there to reduce some of that embodied carbon from that new construction by reusing some of those components.
And then what about fleets? Anything that you want to mention about?
Fleets again. Fleets can be tough. If you've got a fleet manager, a director of transportation that's gung ho on EV, you're good. You're going to get there because there's a ton of money right now and a ton of motivation. If you've got a fleet department that's a little more hesitant to make that change, there's still some really great opportunities. Again, we've spent a lot of time on route optimization. We've utilized some federal funding through the Diesel Emission Reductions Act to retire old inefficient diesel buses with, for us, we did propane, and now that funding can be put towards EV buses. And even with your small motors, there's a state program here, and I think there's others across the country for replacing gas-fired mowers and trimmers and blowers with battery-powered versions of those, which have obviously a climate impact and quite frankly, a very huge impact on local air quality, which is an issue for us in the region. So we've done some projects in that space, and it's a good way to start moving that needle and open folks to the idea of some of these new technologies.
Yeah, excellent. The sort of conditions necessary for success in this are both technical and social. So you're dealing with sort of the need for school system staff and leadership to be brought up to speed on some of this newer technology or new opportunities, and certainly having a champion in the district helps a lot with that. No matter where that champion comes from, actually, just sort of pushing for that education. I wanted to, So we're going to kind of look forward next, but I wanted to take a second and remind the audience that we will have time for questions at the end of our time here. So the way that you do that is entering questions through Slido. There's a box below the video where you can enter those questions. So as you think of them, please drop them in. You don't have to wait till the end. And we're looking forward to addressing some of those questions at the end of our time here. So Andrea, I'm going to go ask you this question first and then go to Shannon. If you could just snap your fingers and make one policy related to schools and climate change happen instantly, what would you want to make happen?
I think that would be to fund school facilities in a way that ensures equitable access to healthy, safe, sustainable facilities and grounds for all kids. That's a real underlying issue is the funding to do these projects, and the fact that it is primarily dependent on local tax-based funding makes a lot of inequities and challenges inherent in our school, in our education funding system generally, but particularly as regards school facilities and grounds.
Yeah, yeah. It's a major challenge to surmount. So Shannon, what about you? What, from the school district perspective, as someone who's working inside the district, like what would you want to see?
Yeah, I think as with all the competing priorities that you mentioned at the start, and you said that, essentially a policy statutory requirement of, us spending a certain dollar per square foot or percentage of replacement cost per year out of our general fund dollars on building improvements focused on, energy efficiency, enhancing the built environment to protect, student health and staff health. I think that would go a long way to getting us there. There's so many other choices to make when it comes to spend, the $1 we have, that sometimes you almost have to be told what to do, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and then you sort of get in a hole, right? If you get too far behind, then it's almost impossible to get caught up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Deferred maintenance just keeps getting deferred and bigger sometimes,
Yeah. Yeah, right. Um, so Shannon, you directly manage us for a district. Andrea, you work to lift up and encourage the work that different schools around the country are doing. How can people who aren't directly involved in, working at a school or managing this for a school, how can they support schools to reduce emissions? Shannon, what do you think?
The places I've seen a lot of success, recently I mentioned that the work in Denver Public Schools is advocacy at the school board level for creation of, energy efficiency targets or carbon reduction action plans, whatever kind of name you want to put to it. And especially if that can come from students. But again, if you're a parent or simply a community member, and you don't feel as though your district or school is taking enough action in that space, having that come from the board is very, very helpful. And they need to hear from their community that that's what the community wants, right? And I think we've worked with some students to make some of those actions, and it can be a little daunting to figure out how do you get in front of the board, or how do you go talk to your city council. So I think inspiring young people to do that and helping them get there is a huge step.
Yeah, and I, just from our perspective in working with school districts, I would add on to that, the most powerful situation is when you find out if there is a staff person working at the district who has a job like yours. And then, as a parent or as a student group, you can work with that person to understand the data at the district, sort of what the biggest needs are. And then you can really advocate for something that the school district, needs immediately. But
yeah.
but the voice of students and teachers and parents can be really powerful in leapfrogging a district too. Instead of just making the next step, they can really push the whole system forward. We've definitely seen that in the group of school district staff that we work with, and you're right that they can be really powerful. Andrea, what do you think? What have you seen?
I think there's a lot of ways to get involved. It depends on where you sit and where your interest lies. I think one option is to get involved with your own school or district and see what they're doing to ensure those three pillars I mentioned before: reducing environmental impacts and costs, improving health and wellness, and teaching effective environmental and sustainability education. We really feel strongly that those three prongs interweave, they complement each other, and they're all important. And finding out what they're doing and seeing where you can help. If you aren't sure where to start with your school or district, one option is to talk to them about creating a sustainability plan or a climate action plan. Sometimes the name needs to be adjusted. It's not a one size fits all for the name, but something that involves a baseline audit of facilities emissions and action steps that address aspects like waste and transportation and even student learning. When schools are aware of their environmental impacts, they're much more likely to take action. And it also leads them to understand the benefits of these efforts and what they bring to student health and learning.
Yeah, moves them to that. So in our final 3 minutes before we take questions, we've got we've talked about this landscape. We've talked about the actions that are possible. We know that there are challenges. I'm just wondering what you each think you see looking at the landscape, sort of as we move forward in this space. Is the main challenge about funding? Are there still technical or scientific things we need to learn? Like what is there? What's standing in the way? What do you see in front of this movement? Shannon, why don't we go with you first?
Yeah, it's a great question. And certainly, I think the easy answer is funding. The more complicated answer is how to kind of fix that decentralized funding paradigm we have. But from what I've seen in schools is actually really when you step back from the idea of funding, it's this idea of risk perception. There's a lot that is asked of school districts as we've all talked about. And so approaching these sort of novel ideas, or at least novel if a particular district hasn't approached it yet, requires an understanding of things that they may not have, in their wheelhouse, right? Even something simple as owning on-site renewable energy, that requires an understanding of energy flows and engineering and insurance and energy markets and invoicing and maintenance and things that may not be inherent in the departments or the leaders making decisions about whether or not to own that renewable. So if you have a choice on how to spend your dollar, and you've got all these other asks, and you know how to kind of repair those asks or answer those asks, it can be tough to go down that what is perceived as oftentimes a riskier road for some leadership.
Yeah, there's sort of this lack of understanding about among people who don't know buildings, who are responsible for managing buildings also, and assets like solar, and that the gap in their understanding can often make them scared to do something new.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, yeah. Andrea, what about you?
I don't think the challenge is technical or scientific. I think we know what action schools can take. We've got a lot of examples. We've got examples from our Green Ribbon honorees. We've got over 700 of them. We publish reports on them every year. So, and we know that school communities and students themselves, like Shannon mentioned in Denver Public Schools, that's one example. From schools, in Portland and Kentucky, all across the country, students have been getting really excited about this work. I expect that in the coming years, we'll see more widespread adoption of these practices by schools across the nation. It seems like it is inevitable. One challenge, of course, will be to ensure the equitable distribution of healthier and more sustainable facilities and grounds. How we can ensure that schools with the biggest burdens are the ones who adopt these practices, and what they need to succeed and how we can best support them will be the challenges. I truly believe that it will take all of us at every sector and level to help our schools become part of the climate solution.
Yeah, it's going to take all of us. Well, thank you both. I'm going to turn to audience questions. One of the ones that I'm seeing from the staff that are collecting and curating is, Andrea, you've thrown a lot, like a wealth of information and data out there about national. Yeah. So where would you tell people to go for data, like carbon emissions of schools and the number of electric buses and like all that kind of stuff? And are there a few key sources for that?
I shortened a little bit, and I didn't cite verbally because I thought it was too much for the audience orally. Some of that is from the Department of Energy. There's good information from an organization called Generation 180. The waste information is from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. World Resources Institute has great information on the adoption of electric school buses. RMI is another organization that has published some information on the environmental impacts of schools. My go-to for data related to school facilities and grounds is, of course, the 2021 State of Our Schools report. I think that is a great primer on school buildings and grounds and their importance, and not just the sustainability piece and the climate piece, but what a resource they are for our communities and what a source of inequity they can be, and on all the different aspects of school facilities. So that's the 2021 State of Our Schools report.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Andrea. Folks also seem to be very interested in the funding opportunities, figures, and tax incentives for schools. So I'm happy to share about these quickly. Do you want me to cover this, Andrea, Shannon, or do you want to take a shot at it?
Either one is fine. I think we can't. I don't think we can drop in links. So maybe I'll hit the couple of energy and EPA programs, and you hit the tax stuff, if that sounds good to you.
Perfect. Let's do it.
So I think a program that is of interest to this audience is Renew America's Schools, and that is overseen by the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy. The Clean School Bus program is overseen by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The deadline actually just closed for the last round of those, and the Renew America Schools, they'll be opening it.
The second.
Yeah, the second round. Sorry, the deadline for the second round. So those are a couple that are of interest. There will, stay tuned. There will be some more funding related announcements coming from EPA this fall. And of course, the announcement of our grantees for those school infrastructure programs. And I'll pass it over to you on the tax credits, because I think you really got a lot of great background on that. So,
yeah, and the Renew America Schools grants was $500 million over 5 years, although they sort of just released more than the share for and the school bus money is $5 billion over 5 years. So the scale is quite different in terms of what is possible there. And that's also, so these are running for quite a long time. So if you didn't know about them before, there's still opportunities to apply in the next few years. Just wanted to point that out. So the two major tax programs that are of interest to schools that were enhanced in the Inflation Reduction Act are the 179D deduction. And that is a deduction that is for energy efficiency in buildings. And you can improve the envelope, lighting, or HVAC, or all three, or whatever, as long as it achieves a certain percentage reduction in your whole building. Then there's a tax deduction that the designer of that work gets. A school district or a public entity like a school district can negotiate with that, and should negotiate with that designer for part of that tax deduction. So that there's some guidance from Treasury on that. And then there's the clean energy investment tax credits are the other thing to watch out for. And this is for things like solar, ground source heat pumps. Those are the major ones that schools are going to probably take advantage of. That's a tax credit. A school district can actually file a 990 and get a check from Treasury. So they don't actually, paying taxes is not part of this. It's about the purchase of that equipment. So they file a 990 and they can get a direct pay credit for the purchase of specific technologies around clean energy. So those are the two that are really huge opportunities for schools. A lot of money on the table that schools can take advantage of.
Yeah, and I would just add, if they're interested in the energy performance contract model, at the federal level, I believe they call it Energy Services Performance Contracting. But there's the Energy Services Coalition, which is a nonprofit that's sort of trying to bridge this public-private partnership idea. And they can probably provide you with information on if you have a state agency that runs it for your region or other organizations.
Yeah, perfect.
And the U.S. Department of Energy is also releasing new resources for schools related to energy savings performance contracting in the near future.
Yay. That's great. And on federal funding, the Center for Green Schools also is wrapping up a 4-part series. That's the recordings are available for free on our site. So that's also a plug for some major work we've been doing in trying to educate schools on these opportunities. So Shannon, I'm going to toss it to you for a little bit deeper dive into ROI decision making. So yes. So discuss a little bit more about like how you present the ROI for these kind of improvements to your leadership in order to sort of spur these investments.
Definitely, yeah. And I'd say there's really kind of 2 levels at which that happens. And obviously we want the biggest, best projects to happen. So for instance, the energy performance contract project I mentioned is about a $2 million project. we focused on kind of net present value approach to presenting that to our leadership, and really brought in the idea of some of the life cycle cost of what we were looking at, in particular with the solar, because I think folks don't often recognize that, so for us in this project, it was we took out a 15-year loan to do these $2 million worth of work, and we're going to pay that loan back with the energy savings we have. Solar makes solar well past 15 years, right? So there's this life cycle cost, life cycle benefit that I don't think the average, lay person that's not familiar with renewable energy is aware of. So yeah, so in that case, it was kind of net present value and life cycle cost benefit. For smaller stuff, we just tend to do a quick standard ROI, right? If you're doing a basic lighting project, then I can go to my leadership and say, hey, look, you give me a couple, $20,000, $40,000, we'll get you that paid back, sometimes in less than 3 years. And that to me is like a no-brainer there. So those are the two I tend to use.
Yeah. And do you have are there like other departments or other staff that are helpful in making the case? Like, are you health folks, or your food services or purchasing, or who else is sort of involved in all this?
Yeah, kind of, all of the above. It's, school districts are kind of, everyone's at the table for good reason. With the energy performance contract project, huge support from our maintenance staff. I had to lean heavily on our procurement staff because, again, it's a financial mechanism. And if we're talking risk perception, I probably shouldn't be in charge of financial mechanisms. That's not my wheelhouse. So we got them all in the room for that kind of project. And then again, if it's more of a smaller project, it may just be maintenance, or it may be just transportation department, depending on kind of what we're working on.
Yeah, that's good. It's good that you've got some other champions that you can kind of pull on across.
Yeah, we don't want to go off of just my numbers all the time. I need someone else to look at them too.
That's good. So Andrea, I'm wondering, there's some questions about, different challenges in different locations, some equity issues for doing this across various school systems. I know that the Green Ribbon Schools program has a number of applicants and awardees who are from schools that serve students, lower wealth communities and disadvantaged students. So wondering, what's your opinion on how schools in low-income communities, particularly those serving historically marginalized students, can be supported by their communities, can pursue this kind of work in an effective way that works for them?
I think there's a misperception that this is only for the suburban, primarily white, well-resourced schools, and it's just not borne out in what we've seen over 12 years of running this award, over 700 nominations I've seen from states. This year, 2/3 of our nominees from states were disadvantaged serving schools. We get schools that are 100% Native American, or Title I, or so it's not only for the privileged schools. And I think a lot of it has to do with partnerships. We see time and time again, these schools have more partners than they can cite, and they're tapping all the various partners and all the various funding streams. It's this this grant here, that opportunity there. They're looking at it all, and it helps that they often have a champion to start, someone who's looking to really integrate sustainability. But then, of course, a system of champions is needed over time. You can't just have one champion, or eventually the work peters out. So I think it's a combination of individual actors, partnerships, and a lot of sheer grit too. I see in these communities, they make it happen. This becomes a priority, and they partner, and they work to make these sustainable changes.
Yeah, I think there's also there's a lot of great opportunities when you invest in school buildings, and many of our school facilities and grounds and fleets need investment. But there's also some things you can do without all that investment. There's steps you can make, and we touched on a couple of those earlier. There's also like behavior like working with students and teachers on modifying their behaviors to save energy and reduce emissions. We had a publication we published several years ago that looked at 5 schools across the country that really knocked that out of the park, and were able to reduce 20 or 30% of their emissions through behavior. I'm wondering, Shannon, like, what have you seen in terms of like student action to reduce emissions? Have you seen any really good case studies of where students and teachers or groups of folks within a school have been able to really make some impact, either in your district or in districts you work with?
Yeah, a couple that come to mind. So one that was in my district, and it actually came out of more of a regional air quality problem-based learning, which is like a teaching model used in STEM. They were looking at issues of air quality in our region, and they realized that their school is what's called a choice school, so that we don't provide transportation. Everyone has to get themselves there. And so there's this huge line of cars every day for pickup and drop off, and like 1 kid per car, right? And so they actually did a project where they created a kind of a Google mobile site, sign up for carpooling, as well as hanging signs to make sure folks weren't idling and going out and knocking on doors and saying, hey, you turn off your car, it's it's a fine temperature out, roll your windows down or whatever. And so hard to quantify the climate impact there, but really cool that they took it upon themselves to, again, improve their own air quality, which is huge, and have that added benefit to the climate. But again, across the country, we've mentioned Denver Public Schools, Salt Lake City Public Schools, Portland Public Schools, Boise, I believe, school district. There's these student groups that again are getting in front of their leadership, and they're getting with their policymakers, and they're saying, this is our future, and we want to have control over it, and you guys currently hold the reins, so let's see some action. And I think that that definitely starts turning the page.
Yeah, that leadership from students. So what about that tension? So there's the student action and what we were talking about earlier in this conversation, where it's sort of the grassroots, push has to be received by something, right? So the school board or a school leadership. Andrea, I'm wondering what your perspective is on, how we train or how we inform or inspire school leaders, school district leaders, to really take ownership of climate action at their schools and school districts.
I think one of the ways we are attempting to do that at our level is inspiring them through examples. So we have annually stood up these examples with our Green Ribbon honorees. We host an annual tour. This fall will actually be in Northern and Central California schools, September 19th to 21st, highlighting some really outstanding examples of sustainable schools. And we tell their story through reports, through our newsletter, and hope to get others, in hopes of getting other schools and districts and their leaders engaged on these topics, and seeing the benefits, the health benefits, the learning benefits, the bottom line benefits, and seeing that it is possible. And like you said before, the vast majority of our Green Ribbon honorees aren't actually net zero schools. They're doing the behavior change. It's a lot of campaigns to not idle cars and turn out the lights, turn off the water. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to start with the cost intensive efforts. And there's a saying that I really like, that you have to eat your your energy efficiency vegetables first before you get your renewable energy dessert. You may not have said that one. But I think it's a great idea that you can start small. You can start with the behavior change and the efficiency, and then the renewables, they may come. But you don't need to start there. Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
But they are so visible, and that's why people go to them first, right?
They're the gateway drug, right? The solar can be the gateway mechanism into other efficiency and climate efforts. So are the school gardens, though, and they're a little bit easier sometimes to get off the ground. We haven't really talked about green schoolyards, but that is a whole trend we've seen across the country with gardens and just green schoolyards, park-like schoolyards that reduce heat and give students a much better place to play and learn.
Yeah. so there are some questions in the from coming from audience members about different levels of government and the sort of roles that they play, and we haven't really talked about state legislatures. And I'm wondering, Shannon, in Colorado, do you know of any state policies that are kind of helping you do the work? So things that might be different in Colorado than other states. I know that you're well networked with other school district folks that are doing this kind of work. Anything that is sort of particular to your state that's been helpful?
Yeah, quite a few things really. The Colorado State channeled the majority of the kind of the VW settlement money into EV infrastructure. I heard actually this morning, I think on the radio, that we're now like the third best state for funding electric vehicle infrastructure in the country. And that sets that example, right? That takes away that fear of the range anxiety for the average folks. And within the school spaces, they just rolled out, I guess, 2 years ago, a benchmarking requirement. So all buildings over 50,000 square feet are required to benchmark their energy use using EPA's portfolio manager. Very simple mechanism. But surprising to find, through our Colorado Association of School District Energy Manager Network, some districts weren't even, they had, like, I got to go find my utility bills, right? Just because they're small. They got one person that's, over transportation, maintenance, custodial, and energy, right? And they're like, well, I got all these employees I'm dealing with. We'll pay the bills and kind of figure it out later. So now they have to get set up and they have to do it and they have to look at it. And then the next step, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is the building performance standards, which will require efficiency targets tied to building modifications, and again, for larger buildings.
Yeah, so there's sort of the like establishing a baseline of encouraging districts to know their own data and understand what's happening, and that we've seen that in not as many states as we would have liked, but some states, are establishing some expectation around that. And then there's also sort of the enabling legislation that actually clears the path for solar installations and that sort of thing. It's easier in some places than others because of state legislation.
Definitely.
Yeah, those are great examples, Shannon. Andre, do you have any perspective on kind of what's going on the state policy level that helps some of these schools along?
I think the tricky part in our country is that it varies so much from state to state, right? And that's the important thing to remember, is that these are policies related to school buildings and grounds, health, and curriculum are state and local. They are not federal. So I think the answer to the question there is it's going to be at a state or local level, but not at a federal level, for sure. And how, whether it can be done at the local or the state level, actually varies depending on what state you're in and how much of a role your state, say, has, like Anissa mentioned earlier, in school facilities, whereas some states have virtually no role in school facilities, whereas others have more robust programs to support their local school districts.
Yeah. All right. So I want to turn, let's see, we have a little bit more time for questions. So that's great, because we've got some really good ones coming in. So I want to turn to grounds, because we haven't talked about grounds at all. So I know that it's not directly under you, Shannon, but you probably have some sense of what's going on with grounds. In our work, where I've seen climate action related to grounds most has been in working on climate risk mitigation when it comes to flooding risk at schools. So a lot of school grounds work to try to create really exciting play spaces that also serve as like stormwater retention or mitigation on school grounds. So that's where I've seen it. Where have you guys seen climate action strongest within the work on school grounds?
Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about water personally, and so I interject myself into our grounds work quite a bit.
Okay.
I also manage the water budget, so I see
Oh,
it,
of
the
course.
costs, and
Yeah.
again, this is Colorado, which is not the rest of the country, but 80% of our $1.2 million per year water budget is for irrigation. We're watering grass, a lot of which isn't used for anything at times. So we're really stepping back and trying to think about landscape use, right? Like how are we using our landscapes now? And can we do that as we see these impacts from climate change and we see potentially hotter and drier weather, and potentially less of water availability here in the state of Colorado. And it's a tough solution. Synthetic turf fields are great. They cost a lot of money. And they've got some other, disadvantages depending on who you talk to. But I think that's the biggest space for us is how to mitigate the way in which we operate in order to continue to provide those educational, recreational, athletic opportunities that our students want, given the resources we have now and will have in the future.
Yeah. How do you balance? There's um, a lot of conversations out there about balancing play spaces, play fields, and water use when it comes to synthetic turf and when it comes to therefore heat island effects and also water usage. And there's a lot of things to balance. How do you think about it? Because people think about it differently and there are different perspectives on this, but how do you think about it?
So, me personally, not Adam Swelt per se, but we're having these conversations, right? And it is a balance. And I think, there's the advantages we see here for synthetic turf are kind of threefold. They're, for our most frequently used play spaces, right? Our actual state sports sanctioned fields, they get a ton of use. They get use all through the winter. And they are impossible to maintain if we have traditional turf. You can't water in the winter in Colorado, but you got kids out there running on it. It's going to get hammered. It's going to not hold up well. It's going to be dangerous, quite frankly. So we see a lot of safety, a lot of uptime, ability to use that field throughout the year, and obviously significant water savings with the synthetic turf. We don't see that as a solution everywhere, right? We're trying to kind of focus those for, again, those athletic sports type fields. The focus currently is to really focus on the areas that just aren't used that much, right? Like we still want to keep a play field for our elementary kids to be on. And as of right now, we're kind of saying, let's stick with Kentucky bluegrass. Maybe we'll try to choose a different, grass species in the future. But again, that acre of grass on the side of the building that, is a right of way, it doesn't need to be grass. It can be other things. And we're literally figuring that out as we go right now. We don't want it to be all rock. But we have limited ability to maintain shrubs and other things. So we're trying to find this mix of natural, maintainable, climate appropriate landscapes that fit the needs of our education and approach.
Yeah, interesting. Andrea, what approaches have you seen? What pops into your mind, I should say, when it comes to sort of emissions reduction, climate action, and school grounds?
Over the years, I've seen a lot of schools move toward what Shannon was saying, more landscape changes that are more water aware. So native planting, bioswales, various regionally appropriate water landscaping that doesn't require extra irrigation, essentially. And schools, students getting involved in the process of researching the plants, planting the native gardens, and learning about, why this matters to their communities. And yes, the various efforts that you mentioned initially of stormwater detention and other types of, landscaping mechanisms to just reduce the water use that is, not necessary for maintaining Kentucky bluegrass in Colorado, for example.
Yeah.
The last thing I would add is I think in the context of climate resilience, climate response. Our grounds are going to be some of the first places our communities see the effects of climate change, right? Our buildings are going to continue to be, maintained spaces from temperature and lighting and such. But if you're seeing more flooding, if you're seeing more drought, you're going to see that on your grounds.
It'll show up on
the other big one. The other big one is just getting rid of the asphalt, which also doesn't do anything for stormwater retention, but it's just so hot, and we're seeing this increase of heat, and kids just can't play on that when it's so hot.
Yeah. I was going to throw in. I mean, we mentioned that the educational components of inspiring and educating students to care about climate action is kind of coming in a different session than this one, but that is a major role of school grounds, is to sort of inspire our students to actually love nature, and you don't protect what you don't love, right? So yeah, that's another part of the picture. Let's see. I have sort of a final question for the two of you, but before we go there, I want to talk about public-private partnerships. Andrea, there are a lot of NGO partners that are working in this space, a lot of service providers operating in this space. If you were to think about a couple of really interesting or inspiring examples of a school or school district pulling in resources, community resources, or national resources available to them, what are a couple of examples of that you would give to the attendees today?
Well, gosh, I feel like almost all of our Green Ribbon honorees are partnering in it. And a lot of times it's with a local park or a museum. It can be a green schoolyards organization or a farm program. There's so many partnerships, and energy savings contractors is another one. Water management districts. There are so many partnerships. Just it's overwhelming. Too many to count. I'm also continually inspired by the partnership that is happening nationally, and with organizations such as your own, with the federal government, around the federal government. We weren't always this coordinated around school sustainability and infrastructure. And I really think it's gotten a lot better in the time that I've seen this work transpire. So over 13 years at the department, there's a lot of great collaboration across federal agencies and sectors to try to bring resources to schools and put them in the hands of schools, understanding that as a school, you can't remember whether it's at U.S. Environmental Protection Agency or at the U.S. Department of Energy, and you shouldn't have to. So we really are trying to get more coordinated and be able to speak, at least to some extent, to each other's programs. So it's not just, I can't talk about that because it's not mine, I don't run it, right? We all help each other, just like you're covering some of Treasury's content today, right? We all kind of want what's best for schools, and we work together to provide that.
Yeah. Shannon, what about you? What kind of partnership models have you seen that have been really successful?
Yeah, I've already kind of talked about energy performance contract, which is a great one. Really rebate programs and different rate structures and things coming out of utilities is one that I think is also a partnership. It's not a we're working together to develop it per se, but it's something that we've leveraged a lot. I know in my school district and here in the Colorado region for different kinds of programs. And the last one that I mentioned, I'm on the board for the Colorado Association of School District Energy Managers, which itself is a very informal grouping of folks. But the way we operate is to bring school district energy managers, if you can imagine, into the room and bring in a guest speaker to each meeting that may speak to heat pumps, one month. Might be renewables, might be lighting, it might be engagement. But these are, again, always sort of private sector entities, but they aren't coming to sell a product or themselves. They're coming to talk about a technology or a process and the way in which it can be implemented in schools. And that's been a huge benefit to, I know, many of the school district energy folks in the region here.
Yeah, awesome. It's great to bring that kind of training. Well, we're we're nearing the end here. And as a final question, I just wanted to kind of try to distill some of this conversation with you both. And I wanted to know if you could leave the audience with one thing. What would you want our audience, knowing some about its makeup and what they're looking for? What do you want them to take away from today's conversation? Shannon, I'll go to you first.
Well, I know there will be, I guess, another session on kind of education in this space, but I started the day with the crux of climate being the triple bottom line, which is behavior, environment, and economic. And I think if we expect citizens of tomorrow to understand how to live in the world that will be, whether it's driving an EV or composting at home, we need to educate them in that space, and we need to show them that we as organizations are doing it. So I think schools need to walk the walk, and we need to bring it into the classroom every day.
Yeah, and that walk the walk, so important. I mean, they can spot hypocrisy from a mile away, right? Our students are very good
Yeah,
at noticing if we're not doing what we're trying to get them to do. Yeah, that's great. Good point. Andrea, what would you leave the audience?
Just that there are many examples to inspire you and resources to support this work, and that we are doing everything we can possibly do at the Federal Education Agency to support these efforts.
Yeah, and where can people find some of the examples of green ribbon schools? Because there are 600 or so examples of award-winning schools. Where should they look for that?
One place to find them is on the Green Strides School Sustainability Resource Hub, and that's greenstrides.org. And you can also find a lot of resources and webinars there to advance this school sustainability work. It's also on our main ed.gov website, ed.gov. Green Ribbon Schools will get you there. If you just kind of search that, it's a little bit of a long URL to call out, but there's a great annual report that we do on these honorees each year. Has kind of like a little vignette on each of their work, just to give you a taste, a flavor of what they're doing. And I think that's a really inspiring document.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. All right, I'm going to pass it back over to Alex. Thank you, Shannon and Andrea. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks, Anissa.
Thank you, Anissa, and thank you for your fantastic moderation. And Andrea and Shannon, thank you for your perspectives and your work. I really hope folks follow up on all the resources and opportunities you mentioned. To everyone who joined us, thank you, and thank you for your many questions. The conversation was recorded and will be available to view on the same webpage immediately. So if you want to go back and look at some of those statistics and opportunities, please do. Again, please register for our climate newsletter to get updates on all of the Academy's climate work, including our September climate conversation on the macroeconomy, speaking of Treasury. More information and registration for that event you can also find above. And as a final reminder, to share your feedback for today's event or ideas for future events, please see the survey also linked above. Finally, thanks to everyone behind the scenes who supported today's event, and thank you to all of you for joining. Take care and good luck with the new school year.